Now that we've looked at how to identify features of a rational function graph, we're going to learn to actually sketch them. In class, you should have already completed the left-hand side of each of these problems. So take a second and make sure that each problem is done correctly and try to find your mistakes if there are any. What we're going to do is go through and graph what we have so far. So I have that my horizontal asymptote is y equals 0. So I'm going to sketch that on my graph. My y-intercept is at 0, negative 1/4. OMG fractions. Just make it a little bit past your x-axis. Then you should have factored, I don't have any holes, I don't have any x-intercepts, and then I have vertical asymptotes at 4 and negative 3. So I'm going to draw those on my graph. So I kind of have the outline of what I need to do, and we have to figure out where the pieces are going to go for my actual graph. And to do that, we're going to use something called a sign chart. To do your sign chart, and you should have some space under your graph, what you're going to do is list each of the factors in your factored form. So I have 3, then I have in the bottom x minus 4, and x plus 3. At the bottom of your sign chart, you're going to list anything that was an x-intercept or a vertical asymptote. In this case, I only have vertical asymptotes, and I'm going to put them in least to greatest order. So I'm going to do negative 3 and positive 4. And when we're doing a sign chart, what your goal is you're going to substitute a number. If I'm in this column, I'm going to substitute in some number that is less than negative 3. So I like to do something like really obviously negative, like negative 100 or something. So for 3 is always going to be positive. So I'm going to go across that top row and put positive. Then I'm going to look at x minus 4. If I substitute in something that is less than negative 3, it's always going to be a negative number. Like negative 10 minus 4 would be negative 14. If I go somewhere between negative 3 and 4, like say 0, 0 minus 4 is negative 4. But if I do anything bigger than 4, like say 10, 10 minus 4 is 6, so that's positive. And now I'm going to do the same thing with x plus 3. So if I plug in something really big and negative, like negative 100, negative 100 plus 3 is a negative number. Then we said 0 is between negative 3 and 4, so 0 plus 3 is positive. And then a really big positive number is going to make that positive. Now, all of this was being multiplied and divided in my original fraction. And so what I do is I look at each column and I think about multiplying. If I have a positive times a negative, that gives me a positive number. If I do a positive times a negative, that's a negative number. And a positive times a positive is positive. So what this means is that on my graph, when I'm less than negative 3, my y values are positive. So they need to be above the x-axis. So I sketch that. Then when I'm between negative 3 and 4, my y values are negative. So they need to be below my x-axis. And then when they're bigger than 4, they're positive again. So let's try another example with number 2. So first let's sketch the information I already have. So I have y equals 3 as my horizontal asymptote, a y-intercept of 0 and 9 over 2. 9 over 2 is about 4.5. And then I have a hole at 2 and 15 over 4. So 15 over 4 is almost 3. So it's about at the point 2, 4. So 2, 4-ish is going to be a hole. You literally draw a hole. X-intercept at negative 3, 0. And then a vertical asymptote at negative 2. Now, you might be able to kind of use your intuition to figure out where these marks are going to go for my actual curve, but I want us to get some practice doing these sign charts because they also are helpful when I solve things with inequalities and as you go on to higher level maths. So the first thing that you want to do is write your factors, and we can do after we have already taken out the whole. So I'm going to do 3x plus 3, x plus 2. That's from this step right here. Then for my sign chart, I'm going to use anything that was an x-intercept or vertical asymptote. So that would be -3 and -2. So 3 is always positive. Then if I'm substituting something less than -3, like say -10, that's going to be negative. Between -3 and -2, so think about like -2.5, then that's going to be positive, positive. Something big and negative, like -100, it's going to be negative, -2.5, still negative, and then bigger than -2 is going to be a positive. And now we look vertically. A positive times a negative is a positive, positive times a positive times a negative is negative, and then we have positive. So when I'm going from anything less than -3, I need to be above my x-axis. Then after -3 and between -2, it goes negative. And then everything after that is positive. And I already have some points, so you want to make sure you're going through those points that you already have on your curve. Some things that you might notice in my sign chart that if you like to just kind of use patterns and stuff can help. If I'm at -3 and I focus on this row for -3, then it changes from negatives to positives after you have the -3. And then for -2, it changes from negatives to positive after -2. So basically wherever your 0 value is where you're going to change your row from negatives to positives. I know it probably seems a little overwhelming at first, but you'll get a lot better at it. So let's sketch what we know. Horizontal asymptote of y equals 0. No y-intercept. A hole at 0, -1. And vertical asymptotes at x equals 2 and x equals -2. So let's do our factors. We have 4, x plus 2, x minus 2, and my only values are -2, +2. 4 is always positive. Then I'm going to have negative, plug in 0, that's positive, positive, negative, negative, positive. And then looking vertically, that's a positive, a negative, and a positive. So sketching that on my graph, below -2 needs to be positive. Between -2 and 2 needs to be negative. So I'm going to go up and touch where that hole was. And then positive again. And I just realized I skipped number 3. Sorry about that. Can't win them all. All right, no horizontal asymptote. Y-intercept at 0, 0. Hole at -3, -3. And no vertical asymptote, and we obviously already have our x-intercept. So I have a kind of boring sign graph, or sign chart rather, of 0, and I'm plugging x. Well, if I plug in a negative number for x, I get negative, and then bigger number, positive. So left of 0, it needs to be negative, and right needs to be positive. Now, how did I know it was going to be a line and not some weird wonky curve thing? What do I have over here once I factored? I have y equals x. What is that? The equation of a line through origin with the slope of 1. Numero 5. We have y equals 1 for my horizontal asymptote, y-intercept of 0 and 1/4, so it's just barely up above my x-axis, x-intercept of -1, 0, +1, 0, vertical asymptotes at -2 and +2. So I have a lot of things going on in my sign chart this time. X plus 1, x minus 1, x plus 2, x minus 2. And then I have to put all those values at the bottom. Make sure you're putting them in order from least to greatest. All right, so -10, let's try -10. That's going to be negative. -1.5 would be negative. 0 is positive. 1.5 positive. 10 positive. I like to choose really exaggerated values. -10, that's going to make it negative. -1.5, negative. 0, negative. 1.5, positive. And then once you get from the negatives to the positive, the rest will be positive. -3, -1.5, that's going to change it all, the rest of it to positives. Then -2, let's see, let's do -10 is negative, -1.5. And we're just substituting in some values. Once again, we're looking for whether when I substitute something in between these two numbers, whether I get a negative or a positive. And then after 2, I'm finally going to get to the positive. Whew, that was a lot of work for this one. 4 negatives is going to make a positive. 3 negatives is going to be negative. 2 negatives is going to make a positive, negative, positive. So from the left, I need to be above my x-axis until -2. So let me do this in blue. There we go. Then between -2 and -1, we're below the x-axis. Between -1 and +1, we are above the x-axis. Then between 1 and 2, we are below the x-axis. And then after 2, we are above the x-axis. We have a y equals 0 for our horizontal asymptote. No y-intercept. A hole at 0, -1/2. No x-intercept, and a vertical asymptote at x equals 2. So only 2 things in my sign chart, really just 1, but 1 over x minus 2. And all I have on my sign chart is 2. Obviously 1 is always positive. When we get to one of the last examples, you see why I keep putting the 1 anyway. Okay, if I'm any number less than 2, this is going to be negative. Any number greater than 2 is going to be positive. So when I'm to the left of 2, it needs to be below the x-axis, and to the right of 2 needs to be above the x-axis. And we're ready for the last 2. Y equals 1 is my horizontal asymptote. Then I have 0, 3 for my y-intercept, -3, 0 for my x-intercept, and x equals -1 for my vertical asymptote. And like I said, you can probably see where my 2 curves are going to show up on this picture, but let's see why it happens with a sign chart. So we have x plus 3 and x plus 1. My 2 numbers are going to be -3 and -1. So choose a number way less than -3, and this will be negative. Between -1 and -3, that would be a good one to do -2. -2 plus 3 is positive, and then anything bigger than -1 will be positive. Another big negative number here, like -10, is going to give that negative. We said let's try -2 for this one. -2 plus 1 is still negative, and then anything bigger than that is going to be positive. So we end up with plus, minus, plus. So to the left of -3 is above my x-axis. Then after -3 up to -1, it's below my x-axis. And then the rest is going to be above my x-axis. Make sure to go through any points you already plotted as you're doing that. Last one, y equals 0, y-intercept at 0, 0, x-intercept at 0, 0, vertical asymptote at -4, and +2. All right, so I have -3x, x plus 4, x minus 2. Now you might see why I was putting those just plain numbers in my sign chart before, because now I have -3x. So my three numbers are going to be, once again, coming from x-intercept vertical asymptote. They're at -4, 0, and 2. So I'm going to do the top row first. Say I have -10. -10 times -3 would be positive. Let's try 1. -1 times -3 is positive. 1 times -3 is negative. 5 times -3 is negative. I'm just choosing random numbers that are in these ranges. Okay, anything less than -4, let's do -10. -10 plus 4 is negative. How about -2? -2 plus 4 is positive. 1 plus 4 is positive. 5 plus 4 is positive. -10 minus 2 is negative. -3 minus 2 is negative. 1 minus 2 is negative. 5 minus 2 is positive. Okay, so that gives me plus, minus, plus, minus. So to the left of -4 is a positive. Let me do that in red. Then between -4 and 0 is negative. Between 0 and 2 is positive. And then after 2 is going to be negative again. And that's it.